So today I am going to just introduce this presentation style that we've done in our college. So the real excitement is going to be when the presenters come up to present their work. So in the College of Fine Arts and Humanities, we have a showcase every spring usually that highlights all the great teaching and research that's being done in our college. In fall 2015, Stacy and I decided that we wanted to kind of restructure how the presentation and the showcase were being done so that we could highlight as many faculty as possible and encourage collaboration. So, this is what we asked our faculty to do in our college meeting that year, is to imagine combining TED Talks, which you're probably very familiar with, technology, education, and design, with a Pikachu format. And that format is where a presenter will show 20 images at 20 seconds each for a total of 7 minutes presentation. And then each presenter is introduced with a non-traditional, non-academic biography. We all do amazing things, but sometimes it's fun to learn about people as people. Oops, sorry. And then we also ask them to focus on the A of STEAM education versus STEM education to see how the arts could be incorporated into this presentation style. And we asked them to make fast-paced and engaging presentations that encourage collaboration across our college. We wanted them to share their interest in teaching, research, performance, and the arts. And although these presentations wouldn't be able to be as much in depth as a regular hour-long presentation, we hoped that it would start a conversation that would continue after the showcase was finished. So we did 2 showcases last year. Our professional development committee selected 7 presenters for each showcase. Each presenter had to apply. They applied with an abstract and then 5 sample images for their presentation. And the things we asked that they could talk about were, first of all, research and creative activity. Our college is really prolific and very active, so we wanted to have a platform to share all that great work that is going on, because we know that our faculty are always writing and writing and writing, and they're getting those much sought after publications. We also know that our faculty spend hours and hours and hours in the studio, and they spend that time in the studio creating works to be exhibited, and then those works are performed on stage, as well as they're conducted. And then we wanted to know about innovative teaching as well. A lot of great teaching happens at our university and in our college. So we wanted to know about innovative practices that you had found had worked for you as an individual to share with our college. And maybe that took place inside the classroom, or using new technology in your classroom in an innovative way. Maybe that happened outside the classroom, taking students to regional or national conferences to present their work, or faculty-mentored research like posters on the Capitol, or maybe study abroad, which our college is extremely active in that case, and there's a lot of great innovative teaching that happens in those programs as well. We also proposed that they could talk about leading a student group or mentoring student groups. And then we reached out to those faculty that had got those really awesome sabbaticals and asked them to present their research in this way. We also looked for faculty who were doing experiential education, experiential learning, involved with the QEP, or maybe they have received an award or honor on campus that they could share that research or great teaching about with us. In the fall 2016 showcase, we had a great group of presenters. We learned about innovative ways to teach creative writing. We learned about the importance of public art on campus. And then we had a really great, it was actually here in the Stables, and we filled the room. We had great attendance and feedback. And this was all experimental. We did it in the fall, just on an afternoon. We had so much good feedback that our faculty asked that we have another showcase in the spring. So we did, and we combined it with our annual awards and recognition banquet for our college. This year we had another great group of presenters, many of which you're going to hear from today. And in that showcase, we learned about attention spans in classrooms, and we learned about museum exhibition design. Again, we had great attendance by faculty. We also invited administration across campus to both showcases, and we were lucky that they attended and appreciated the presentations. And our next showcase is going to be on April 12th, 2017. And thank you. And now you guys are in for the real bones of this program, which is our great faculty and their presentations.
So part of this presentation style is I'm going to time our presenters. They have 7 minutes, and so you'll hear the alarm go off, and they have to stop at 7 minutes. So for the first one, you're going to open it up for. Oh, and this now works. Thank you, Eric Swisher, for the batteries. Thank you, Tanya, for the clicker. This year's sophomore class was born the same year that Sue Schroeder started teaching TESOL, linguistics, and other language-related classes at Murray State. She is a nerd and loves reading sci-fi, gaming, and making beer. She has learned many things over the years, such as 5 dogs are just too many. And the name of that fish in the lakes is pronounced crappie, not crappy.
Give me a sec. Don't start the timer. I'm starting from the second slide anyway. I have my own timer since I'm one of those talkers. Go. I'm going to talk about some research I've been doing. It's been ongoing for years and years. I'm really slow at researching, but it has to do with metaphor. In 1980, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson came out with a book called Metaphors We Live By, which really changed the way we thought about language. And the reason is that metaphor isn't just literary, it is also cognitive, in the sense that the language we use reflects the way we metaphorically think about things. So for example, in English, we have 2 separate phrases, in the car and on the car, and they are different. They have totally different meanings. And the reason actually starts to become kind of fascinating according to Lakoff and Johnson, and that is that cars are containers in English, right? Which isn't really that interesting until you think of the difference between, say, airplanes. You can be in a plane and on a plane, and it means the same thing. And that reason, according to Lakoff and Johnson, is because public transportation is both container or surface. That's why you can say on. And this extends in other really interesting ways. For example, even if a car is a convertible and the top is down, you're still only in the car. So this kind of made a big ripple with all these sorts of examples, and everybody kind of went crazy for a while trying to figure out what this meant for teaching, or what this meant for pedagogy, or what this meant for language. And in New Yorker, the New Yorker and everybody started doing all these things about metaphor. And 25 years later, what we have is a bunch of studies about metaphor and no real direction. Nobody can find anything concrete to do with it, and that's how I got really interested in it. How can something that everybody finds so interesting when they first hear about it not be useful in some way? Is it a theoretical problem? Is it an application problem? Is it a timing pedagogy problem? Whatever. So what I decided to do was create a research question based on the teacher education classes that I work with. And at the time, I worked mostly with teacher education at the graduate level in the Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages class. But these people already have their bachelor's degrees, but they're not trained teachers yet, most of them. And the question is, can conceptual or cognitive metaphor help new teachers become successful more quickly? Because we're always trying to figure out not just a good way to train our students, but the best way to help them to learn. So what I did was I went and I looked around and I found a whole bunch of metaphors that non-teachers use to talk about teachers. Found no pattern there, but I decided to try and use that as the point to train my newer teachers about how to think about teaching. You're in teaching, you've just started being a teacher, what does that mean, metaphorically? So this is loosely my slide for the research design. I explained to them overtly, very early in the semester, exactly how Lakoff and Johnson's framework works. They all find that very fun. We do some analysis with English, and then we try to talk about teaching. And that would tell me, in their minds, after they wrote it down, how they metaphorically think about teaching as new teachers. And then what can we do with that? Here's what I found: a huge mess. Right? Even within my relatively small sample group of 2 classes, I couldn't find any sort of rhyme or reason why they were responding, how they did, even after I had taught them about Lakoff and Johnson's cognitive model, because I thought that would help. I was totally wrong. So what we got were teachers are farmers, we got teachers are generals, teachers are builders, teachers are friends, teachers are leaders, teachers are mirrors. Teachers are gangsters, like mob bosses, it turns out. That's the, you do it because I say so and you can't refuse sort of thing. And then teachers are bridges, they get really kind of poetic and I would say huggy, touchy-feely about it. But no sort of rhyme and reason, and they couldn't explain how that would translate into their teaching concretely, which I thought was a really big problem. So this is sort of about how my first study failed and what I did about it. I realized, I went back and looked at the data and looked at what students had said, and it turns out that I think the first problem was with me, and that is I fell into the metaphor trap too. I thought of heads as containers, and the metaphors were in there, and all I needed to do was get in and see what was in their brains, and it turns out that heads are full of brains, not full of metaphors. Which is, of course, true, but it took me a while to reorient myself towards that. So I went back and I looked at some of the newer neurological studies. They do stuff with brain scans now when they tell people to recite poetry or talk about metaphors or analyze things. And I hooked onto this idea of familiarity, that they're doing studies about there's a big difference between a metaphor that you are familiar with and a metaphor that you are not familiar with. For example, like when El Nino comes around, every time the media re-explains it metaphorically because everybody forgets what it is, sort of thing. So if new teachers think about teaching one way, my prediction was that veteran teachers think about teaching using different metaphors, and they switch in between those metaphors. And that's been my research in the last year or so. I'll tell you what, that was wrong too. Isn't that funny? What turned out to be, and this is the information I'm working with the experienced teachers, is that the difference seems to be that teachers think non-metaphorically. And to me, this is really exciting. Teaching is the thing. It's not teaching is a bridge and teaching is farming. It is teaching is teaching. And so I'm starting to work on some prompts, and these become really circular, like with my brain and the metaphor problem, to work with people to work out when they think about it metaphorically and when they don't think about it metaphorically, and if we can tweak our pedagogy, or my pedagogy in particular, to do that from the beginning. To not hit the metaphor so heavily, but to switch and say, yeah, teachers are like farmers, but students aren't sheep. Students aren't plants. You can always take them down that garden path. It's a lot of fun. But that's what I'm doing now, and I'm getting ready to collect data. So the new one is going to be, there we go, 7, metaphor and non-metaphor model. That's where we're going with that. So if you want to participate or if you want to know about it, let me know. Thanks. Somebody else has to open that. Thanks. Oh, I got the timer.
I'm not going to do that. Jim is next, right? Yes. All right. Jim Bryant was born in the same town and in the same year that A.J. Foyt won his world record 4th Indy 500. Jim has held many jobs, including house painter, migrant farm worker, and professional skater. Jim did, however, decline the job offer to be the courtroom sketch artist for the Mike Tyson rape trial. Jim survived being bit by a shark while surfing off the coast of Florida and attended Arnold Palmer's 60th birthday party. Those two did not happen together. Jim is currently professor of graphic design in the Department of Art and Design. Jim Bryant.
All right. Thank you. Oops, sorry. I'm not a PC person. I don't know how this works. Hold on. Okay. Thank you. So I want to talk to you about words and typography. The words that you type on a page or that you present in a PowerPoint presentation are communicating ideas to your audience before any of them have ever read a word. The look of typefaces gives them personality, so that the articles you publish, the flyers you hang in the hallway, the emails that you send, all have some personality, and they're communicating a first impression. And we want to make sure that you have control over that, because those things that you're presenting are being judged before a word has ever been read. A simple little example. I could ask you to take a look at each one of these words, and while you're looking at the word, picture a house in your mind. And you might picture a Victorian home, or maybe something out west on a farm, or maybe something in the suburbs, or maybe a house that's more sleek and contemporary and modern. But all the words are the same. And so the look of the words is important. The current version of Microsoft Office installs 235 fonts on your computer. That's a whole lot of personality. They're not all beautiful, and they're not all appropriate for every situation. You have to choose carefully. Fonts acquire their personality from a combination of just simply their shapes, but also where we see them most used, and sometimes from their history, where they come from and where they were used from historically. The oldest category of fonts is serif fonts. Serif fonts are, you can tell what a serif font is because it has little feet on the ends of the letters, the little decorative bits. Serif fonts came into heavy use in the 1400s when Gutenberg was printing his very first books. And those books were initially only available to scholars and the very wealthy. And as a result of the printing industry, we often now associate serif fonts with history and with gravitas, with importance, with knowledge. Sans-Serif fonts are much newer. They've been in existence a little over 100 years, but they've been popular less than 100 years. When they first were invented or first being used, many people considered them very ugly. But now they're considered modern or contemporary. They're sometimes associated with technology, with simplicity, and some fonts, like Helvetica, were specifically designed to have no baggage, to have no history. There's a couple of other, we're going to talk about these two categories. There's a couple of other big categories of fonts. One is scripts, anything that imitates handwriting or mimics handwriting, which have all kinds of meanings. And then decorative fonts, which are typically only used for titles or headlines. Hopefully we wouldn't ever put an entire document in one of either of these typefaces. Could you imagine reading an entire novel in the Harry Potter typeface? Put the Harry Potter books in the Harry Potter typeface. It'd be horrible. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the serif and the sans-serif and figuring out which to choose or how to know which to choose. So I'm going to talk about some studies that have been done. This is very recent. This is in the last 2 years, these studies. In this study, about 300 people were shown the plans to put together a simple wardrobe. Very IKEA-like instructions. They weren't shown the wardrobe. They weren't shown a picture of what the wardrobe would look like when it was done. There was no wood or building. There were no hammers, just the instructions. But one set of instructions was shown to them in a serif typeface, and another set of instructions was shown to them in the sans-serif typeface. Just like in the projection, you may not be able to tell from where you're sitting, but the instructions were identical other than the typeface. When people were asked which would be easier to build, overwhelmingly, 90% of the people who read the instructions in the sans-serif typeface believed that that wardrobe would be easier to build, even though the instructions were identical. And there are several other studies that are similar. when readers were given a description of a documentary, a video documentary, so they didn't see the documentary, they only read a description of it. When they read it in serif and in sans-serif, 78% believed that that documentary would be well-researched and an in-depth documentary, as compared to 22% who believed that when they read it in the sans-serif typeface. Similarly, readers were given a description of an orchestra. 82% of the readers believed that the orchestra would have more skilled musicians when they read the description of the orchestra in the serif typeface. So what do you do with this information? We know that whenever people read things in a serif typeface, they associate it with more skillful and knowledgeable content. We know that when readers read in a sans-serif typeface, that they are going to associate that what they're reading, it's easier to accomplish, it's easier to understand. They may believe that it's going to be faster. So in your everyday lives, you're applying for a grant, you're submitting a manuscript to a publisher. When you want to be taken seriously, you set that in a serif typeface. When you're presenting new material to a group of students, you're giving them how-to instructions. You want them to think that the material is easier to understand, you put it in a sans-serif typeface. And whatever you do, know that Comic Sans is neither knowledgeable nor easier to understand. Never use Comic Sans. This is only the tip of the iceberg. There's tons of information about how type works. Oh, I guess that's my time. All right. Thank you very much.
I have the introductions now. Dr. Tanya Romero Gonzalez has initiated her third year as an assistant professor of Spanish in the Department of Modern Languages at Murray State University, where she teaches Spanish, Spanish culture, film, and literature. Her talk is inspired by the abstract game, a distorted word association game that her in-laws made her play during long road trips. In turn, her husband had to learn how to drink homemade fermented grape juice out of a wineskin at his wife's hometown in southern Spain. Both of them passed these rites of passage with flying colors and live happily in Murray, Kentucky.
Thank you. I'm going to talk about visual metaphors and how I use images in my class, but first a little bit of an introduction to the abstract game, just in case you're curious, because it was the inspiration for this talk. The abstract game is a word association game, but with several degrees of separation. So for example, if a person says the word silver, the next person might think of gold, but that's way too easy. Golden Girls would be better, but still too easy. A good association would be Sicily, because one of the characters from the Golden Girls were reminiscent about the olden days by starting with Sicily and then a year 1981. So if the association, if people can figure out the association, that's not a good association. You should give this a try when you're with your in-laws trapped in a car. So I'm sure we've all noticed the current overuse of the term literally to actually refer to a figurative meaning. I try to exploit this tendency in my class by using what I refer to as visual metaphors. These are unexpected, surreal, or even shocking images which can be incorporated in any discipline and at many different levels. So I would like for you to think while I show the images how you could incorporate them into your own classes and disciplines. a question I usually get is, where do you find these images? The short answer is the internet, of course. But finding images used to be a very time-consuming and overwhelming task with never-ending searches. So I changed my approach, and I no longer look for images. If I see an image, a meme, a commercial, a video I like, then I save it into a file or folder, and when I prepare my class, I go there and pick something and think of ways of incorporating that into my class. Some resources. Just use the resources that you already use. If you use Facebook, Twitter, if there is a web page you tend to like or an artist, follow that closely and use that as your resource. You don't have to do any extra work. Use what you're already using. And the most efficient strategy is to look for collaborators. We work next to each other, but sometimes we might feel isolated. But we do a lot of work that we spend a lot of time preparing our materials, so if we share them, we can have a more fruitful collaboration. My interest in images stem from research that suggested that the rate of retention of knowledge is higher when we associate concepts with images. And this seems to be true when the association between concept and image is concrete. However, what happens when this connection is not straightforward? This is what I'm currently looking into, and the preliminary data suggests that actually when the connection is abstract, is not straightforward, the retention is actually higher than if it were concrete. Another strategy that I use is to use images where there is a twist to something familiar, and it's as in this image. And I make an effort to reuse my images in all of my classes. For example, I've used this is a set of several images. I've used this image in my beginners Spanish 101 class to introduce colors, but I've also used it in my intermediate class to talk about commands, how to follow the steps in a recipe, to my upper level literature class where we talk about rhetoric devices such as puns, synesthesia. So if we are reusing our materials, we can be more efficient. And I also revisit the same images at different points during the semester, and we talk about them in different contexts. How do the images change, if they change at all? What are other meanings that we can add to this image? Two other strategies are, on the one hand, using images to compare, and on the other hand, contrasting. How could we use images of this type when we're debating a point in our classes? An image can also be a way of introducing a problem-solving activity or discussion in our classes. And this one is one of my favorite strategies because in literature, in film, and in life, when there's a lot in the gray area. So in that space, where people can merge ideas, concepts, in a different way, in an unexpected way, we can have the more in-depth observations and discussions when we merge these two familiar objects in an unexpected way. So I encourage you to go off the beaten path, to explore other ways of teaching and take a little detour and do things differently. And I'm gonna talk about a specific example of how I've used images in one class. This was for a global cinema in Spanish class, and I started with the image of an onion because the film we were discussing talked about cooking a lot. And I started with this question: when was the last time that you cut an onion? I was very surprised by the answer. 8 out of 21 of my students had never in their life actually cut an onion. So the next step was to ask, what does that say about us? What are the implications of this? And students mention many reasons, and they talk about financial, cultural, practical reasons. They talk about their family dynamics. So it was a very fruitful conversation. Another question was, how do you avoid crying when you're cutting an onion? And we discussed this because the film mentioned one trick to do this, but the actual point of this question was to talk about who passed on this important information. And also students had a list of tricks that I've never heard of, so I also learned from that. The next step in the discussion was that I requested students to talk about an object that had been passed on from generation to generation and encapsulated some special meaning or knowledge. And then we went back to the source, which was the film. But the conclusion is that there's no secret. We all know that Superman is Clark Kent. We all know that we use images, so I encourage you to use images in your classes. Thank you.
Worked on a sailing ship, made chocolate bunnies, and directed secondary school performances of Hamlet, as well as Aristophanes' Wealth, Henry Fielding's Tom Thumb, and Thornton Wilder's The Skin of Our Teeth, before beginning her Murray State career. Her dog is named after an Amazon queen. Her cat is named after the median of Highway 641. Her son is named after a beloved great uncle, and she is named after no one in particular.
Thank you. As some of you may know, I've spent the past 8 years developing and piloting performance-based Shakespeare units for kids grades 3 through 8. Over the past year, I have been experimenting with using graphic novels in teaching Shakespeare. Plays are challenging teaches, especially for teachers who don't have the experience or the desire to get a play on its feet. A play depicted in a graphic novel in some ways splits the difference between action on the stage and words on the page. The graphic novel, which with its sequential art, in some cases approximates a storyboard, the visual mapping tool used in filmmaking and in advertising. Last year, I used grant money to purchase a couple of classroom sets of a graphic novel version of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, and solicited the help of some teachers who were planning on bringing their students to the Murray Shakespeare Festival performance of that play. In the end, I had input and feedback from 7th and 12th grade teachers and from college classes, a hum class, an Intro to English Studies class, and a 300-level Shakespeare class. The edition we used is a manga edition. It's a cut text, but it's still in Shakespeare's early modern English. Some of the cuts were troubling at first. For example, in an early scene in which Cassius is depicted in an early scene in which Cassius is describing an alleged swimming competition between Cassius and Caesar, the graphic novel cuts 2 key phrases: Cassius's comparison of himself with the ancient Greek hero, or the ancient hero Aeneas, and his remark, "'Tis true," a remark that in Shakespeare almost always means, "'Tis not true." The illustration of Cassius, though, that precedes the description, does what the missing words do. Cassius is depicted as faceless, unreadable, unreliable. The illustrator depicts the two as boys, though, and depicts the alleged swimming competition graphically. The boy Caesar is presented visually, drowning, and then the 2 skinny boys are depicted dejected together, suggesting a veracity in the event that is not textually supported. What is lost in depicting that which may be fabrication on Cassius's part is made up for in another depiction that is not textually supportable in Shakespeare. Cassius is depicted as a puppet master. One Shakespeare student commented that she hadn't recognized the extent of Cassius's manipulation until she saw the illustration. The 7th graders, who learned the plot of the play from the cut graphic novel version had no problem identifying Cassius as the antagonist and the villain. And when I pointed out that the swimming contest episode in the text is merely described and added that the remark about the "'tis true" comment, they were even more skeptical of the nasty Cassius. With the 7th graders, I reinforced the graphic novel experience with a few performance-based activities. One was the scene of Caesar's murder. In the illustration, the conspirators are lined up before Caesar. The script we used looks like this. Students always have their scripts, so no memorization, and thus a lot less Shakespeare. And here is Caesar and Casca and Brutus hiding their weapons. I'm working in the public schools, so giant stuffed animals make really great fake weapons. Note the blocking that they picked up from the sequential art. And Casca strikes first, then fall Caesar. Et tu, Brute. And in the illustration from the graphic novel, they circle the dead Caesar. New cast, new interpretation, and this group has picked up on the circling image from the sequential art. Despite being able to use a graphic novel version in tandem with the full text version, teachers' biggest complaint about the manga version was that it's a cut text. Classical Comics produces full-text, original language versions of 5 of Shakespeare's plays, but alas, Julius Caesar is not one of them. This year's Shakespeare Festival, Shakespeare Festival play, Romeo and Juliet, is one of them. Last year, I experimented with the Classical Comics Henry V in 2 of my college classes. In fact, I could not get my Intro to English Studies students to give them back. They didn't like that all the text was presented as prose because Shakespeare uses prose and poetry in different places for very different purposes, but they did like the illustrations and especially the settings. As much as I would love to use the gorgeous multi-ethnic Gareth Hines graphic novel version of Romeo and Juliet, Hines's text, like the manga, is a cut text. So this time, with teaching circle money, and a group of my colleagues, including Debbie Bell, Rusty Jones, and Kara Mathis, we have ordered a classroom set of the Classical Comics Romeo and Juliet. A teacher workshop is scheduled for next week, and we will recruit some regional middle school and high school teachers to borrow our classroom text set and to gather data so that they can contribute to this ongoing study. And the last illustration, this is just part of the balcony scene from the graphic novel version. And you'll notice the use of thought bubbles and then speech bubbles, which is a really nice, another really nice addition to the way that we teach Shakespeare that we can tap into when we're using the graphic novel. Thanks.
Jack of all trades and a master of Spanish, Martin Kane lives for long siestas and the occasional thunderstorm. He grew up in Michigan and was extremely popular in high school, a fact that no one can take away from him. He married his grad school sweetheart at the MSU Arboretum in 2014 in a ceremony performed by his sister. She now tells everyone that she married her brother in Kentucky. He has visited Paris, Patty's, and Paducah on his pedal bike.
All right. The title of my presentation is Sink to Swim, Stronger, Challenging Students' Perceptions of Competence via Intense Self-Assessment. Let's dive right in. Most of you, when you wake up, before you go in to start teaching, probably ask yourselves, WWPDD. There might be 1 or 2 new faculty here. I'll just let you in on what this means. What would President Davies do? We all know this. I would propose a second question to ask yourself. WWTFD. TF standing, of course, for Terrence Fletcher. Terrence Fletcher, Whiplash, good movie, watch it. Who is Terrence Fletcher? In a word, a fictional and sadistic leader of young people. His cross to bear is that he knows excellence, and his curse is that he pursues it through his students. All told, he is none too different from you and me. He remembers a time when political slogans implored us to keep America great still. He remembers when water wasn't smart, and when racers were really racers. And no one was blind to their own mediocrity because of heaps of cheap ribbons and equally cheap praise. And when good job, like I love you, actually meant something. Fletcher's barbaric flaws aside, he makes a poignant point. Many students don't have entirely accurate perceptions of their abilities, and I fully agree with this is something that educators have a duty to combat. And as a side note, anecdotally, generally I see students overestimate their abilities, but it does go in both directions, and over or under, it's definitely a problem. So what are the consequences of this? Well, big fish in small ponds may not last long in Kentucky Lake, let alone the Atlantic. And maybe the French that gets you high praise in Paris, Tennessee, only gets you frustrated in Big Paris. In any event, professional or bodily harm can await students who can't properly contextualize their skills. Now, Fletcher's brutal pedagogical approaches, if left undiluted, would land all of us in jail. Whereas he would advocate cement shoes or Houdini water torture dunkings, we would be wise to water down his techniques, but not entirely. We need to put students on the spot in difficult scenarios and make sure that they go outside of their comfort zones. We need to present them with novel activities requiring ingenuity and ability, and most of all of this needs to be done without warning. This is an image that I recently used in my Spanish 430 class. I gave them 2 minutes, all of my students, 2 minutes to look at the image, formulate a scenario in their minds that would incorporate all of the pictured elements, and they were then instructed to take out their phones and to record themselves speaking, making a 5-minute fictional phone call entirely in Spanish. And they were calling the sheriff of Marshall County. It was, for some students, a very challenging task. For others, it was an unmitigated disaster. However, I argue that it was of great value for all involved, namely due to our follow-up activity. Before we get to that activity, personal story time. Back when I wore a younger man's hair, that is indeed me, I was fresh off the plane and studying abroad in Viña del Mar, Chile. The first night I spent with my host family. We were sitting around the dinner mesa, talking about the house rules and getting acquainted, when I spontaneously uttered the following: Ojalá mi mujer sepa lo mucho que la aprecio. I had just used, quite perfectly, the pluperfect subjunctive tense, the queen mother of Spanish grammatical difficulty, unrehearsed. And my adopted Chilean family did not bat a single ojo. This was simply not impressive to them. It was at best mundane. Later that night, and still stunned that they were not impressed with my Spanish, I contemplated the moment. Sure, I was bueno at Español, but I did have a long, long way to go. This was a watershed moment that changed the course of my studies, and I owe it to being in a demanding, intense situation that was fortuitously accompanied by a little bit of self-reflection. Self-reflection is something that we must incorporate into all of these activities that we're forcing our students to do. This is where the best magic happens. What went well? What did I perform strongly on? Why? What went poorly? Where and why did I struggle? Where did I fail? How did I do compared to my peers? How well could my teacher, or perhaps a person off the street in Montevideo, handle this task? Most importantly, what am I going to do to improve? What concrete steps will I take to be able to excel the next time that I'm faced with a similar challenge? Before students have a chance to fully dry themselves off from these activities, make sure they take a very, very close look at their own performance. With your students, do them a favor. Give them that metaphorical kick in the hindquarters. Remember to be safe. Keep things controlled and reasonable and legal, but make sure they know the feel of open water as well. Be prepared for them to struggle. This can be disheartening as well as enlightening for you both. And finally, I hope that once you get them to swim, they'll soon be ready to fly. Thank you for your time.
No, Jana next. You're together, so I can read them both?
They're collaborative.
Great, they're collaborative, so I'm gonna read these both. Janet Hackathorn, a soon-to-be world-renowned and famous psychologist for something we don't know yet, but be sure it will be of great importance, is a lover of reading really terrible novels, eating all the food, teaching statistics in ridiculous ways, eating more food, and telling awful jokes in the classrooms. She is a whiz at bar trivia and has over 13 tattoos. Everything she knows, she has learned. Were it not for a few inspirational undergraduate professors, Sean Reif would probably be the most senior member of the Geek Squad at the Alpharetta, Georgia Best Buy store. Instead, he turned his interest in technology and people into an academic career. He is an assistant professor of psychology at Murray State University who studies technology and personal relationships, as well as new methods of data collection and analysis in the social sciences.
Thank you. So I realized earlier that Jenna pointed out to me, I think we're the only non-teaching related talk today. So I'll just go ahead and point out we don't actually do any teaching over in the Department of Psychology. There are a bunch of students who just kind of mill around the hallways. We can never figure out why they're there. But no, today I'm going to talk about some research that Jan and I, as well as two other colleagues, have done about the Ashley Madison scandal. How many of you are familiar with the Ashley Madison thing that happened? Okay, good. So we did this working with grad student Jordan Daniels and another faculty member at Hobart and William Smith College, Brian Ashdown. So for those of you who don't know, ashleymadison.com is a website where married individuals can connect with others who might be in search of an extramarital affair. And in fact, actually, they're the new family-friendly Ashley Madison now, because they're pushing the fact that over half of their membership is single. So I don't know what that means. But some bad news. Of course, what could go wrong, right? Some bad news for Ashley Madison. In mid-July of 2015, Avid Life Media, that's their parent company, was infiltrated by a group of hackers who called themselves the Impact Team. These groups always have great names. And this collective obtained personal data on millions of users and members of the site, and then threatened to release the data to the public if the website did not shut itself down. Avid Life Media apparently does not negotiate with terrorists, right? So they did, in fact, release the data on August 19th. Just to, in case you can't read that, we are the Impact Team. We've taken over all systems in your entire office and production domains, all customer information databases, source code repositories, financial records, emails, shutting down AM and EM. I believe EM is established mail. That's their sister or brother site, however you want to look at it. Will cost you, but non-compliance will cost you more. We'll release all customer records and so on and so forth. Now, there were a number of big names that were included in this database because, of course, as soon as this was released, people started mining it for, well, who do I know who's in there? Anybody remember the name of the one person who got kind of in the most trouble for this? Josh Duggar? He's the star of TLC's 19, 20, 21, 35 Kids and Counting, who can keep up. He was also the executive director of the Family Research Council. This is a D.C. lobbying firm that's focused on advancing a socially conservative agenda. Paid for an affair guarantee, like the Cadillac account on ashleymadison.com. Now, what's interesting about this, I study social media, so I collect tweets the same way normal people collect stamps and baseball cards. So we saw a significant response about Duggar on social media. There's part of the public response was just to openly ridicule him. One example there. That's awfully clever. Let's see. There's also, at the same time, a person both ridicules Duggar and acknowledges that he was the victim of a crime, which is kind of an interesting duality, right? So obviously there's an element of hypocrisy here, right? They're focused on family values. But less than a year since the Ashland-Madison leak took place, there were 3 suicides, 1 ousted mayor, there was a disgraced state prosecutor, all sorts of stories about extortion and divorce. So one of the things that we were interested in is why do people do that? Why do we enjoy seeing someone get their just desserts? There's a myriad of research that shows that when negative events occur, others' reactions can be counterproductive, counterintuitive. So rather than offering support, people sometimes take pleasure in the misfortunes of others. There's also some research on infidelity, but no studies have explained or examined perceptions of individuals who simultaneously are attempting to commit infidelity, but are also being victimized in some sort of broader sense. So being a good social scientist, my colleague Janet Hackathorn saw some human suffering and misfortune as an excellent research opportunity. Again, that's what we do instead of teaching in the Department of Psychology. So she put together an online survey, and we collected data using a number of different measures: belief in a just world, lie acceptability, sociosexuality, perceptions of infidelity, sex guilt, jealousy, online privacy concerns, and also demographics like age, sex, religiosity, and whether or not you've ever been cheated on. And thinking that these good exploratory questions about what could predict increased derogation of Ashley-Madison users. We collected data in the fall of 2015 and collected data from a total of 322 participants, about 3/4 of whom were female. Decent age range from 18 to 78 years of age. We collected data from 2 universities, also used Amazon MTurk, and posted recruitment ads on Craigslist. Not a representative sample, but I think a good swath, certainly going beyond the usual undergraduate sampling frame that we often use. To analyze these data, and at the very end, I should emphasize, at the very end, participants were informed about the Ashley-Madison hack, and then asked some questions about their perceptions of the individuals who were outed as part of that hack. We used linear regression to predict that demonization of Ashley-Madison users. And just to summarize, because this was an exploratory study, we used this sort of 2-step process to identify predictors of user demonization. I'm happy to talk about this in greater detail later. We ended up with this model of demonization of Ashley-Madison users with 3 predictors that I want to point out. One is age, the another is jealousy, and the other is sex guilt. So with jealousy, I want to note that approximately half of our sample reported that they had been cheated on by a romantic partner, but cheating history did not actually predict demonization of Ashley-Madison users. You would expect that kind of personal information, personal experience to be relevant. Also, if you see up there, sex guilt negatively influences comfort with sexual behavior, so that may be why religiosity was not correlated. Sex guilt is a sort of a more precise predictor that might sort of absorb some of that variance that normally is accounted for by religiosity. So one explanation for this finding is that if you're someone who is likely to be jealous or feel guilty about sex, you may be more likely to simply ignore the data breach and focus solely on the fact that adultery has been committed or people were attempting to commit adultery. Hence the notion that it's actually about me. We need some comparative research to parse that. Thank you very much.
Finally, we have Eric Swisher. Eric Swisher has taught aggressive and overly confident trumpet players for 28 years. This turned out to be perfect training for a career in higher education. He is a 5th-generation teacher, a frustrated former basketball player, and a Star Wars nerd with an unhealthy Darth Vader obsession. His very forgiving wife teaches at Murray Middle School, where his smart-ass daughter attends the 6th grade.
And she is very much a smart ass. And my wife is very forgiving. So it was interesting that Terrence Fletcher came up. As a musician, there were a whole bunch of friends in the field of music of mine that had nervous tics about teachers like that. We've all had teachers like that. And I try to see if I can walk up to that line without crossing it. Now, that line moves a lot. It moves with every student. It moves with the day. It moves with the time of the semester. So I'm constantly trying to read my students. Does this work, or am I going to have to? It does? Okay, thank you. So I'm constantly trying to read my folks to make sure that I can push them and get them as far as they can go without breaking them. So that's kind of where I'm going with this. So how to build student relationships without resorting to kumbaya. So why even build student relationships? Now, obviously, I'm teaching one-on-one lessons all day long. I have a much different kind of a teaching load than probably everybody in the room. I have to know my students very, very, very well. I get to know them when they're 9th and 10th graders generally, and I start recruiting them then, much like athletics do. So, you'll be more effective. It's much more enjoyable, and the bar is pretty low with building student relationships. So, just make the attempt, and they'll love it. Okay? Know yourself. This is not me. If it's you, that's cool. I'm not going to do kumbaya and trust balls. That's okay. My mother was into kumbaya. She made it work. She was teacher of the year in Oklahoma, and she was a fabulous teacher. Still is. Retired, though. But she used a completely different methodology that would make my skin crawl. This isn't me either. I tried to do that for a couple years when I was hired to be Mr. Serious, Mr. Professorial. I didn't do the bow tie thing. The students saw right through it. They saw that it was an act, and they saw that I was being inauthentic, and it didn't work at all. So if your class was, this is kind of what my rule of thumb, if your class is full of friends, how would you act? Let some of that show. Legal. Right? It's okay. Again, I've known my students for a very long time. I've recruited most of them while they were in high school. It's pretty rare that a student just shows up that I don't know about. In the music department, we're responsible for going out and getting our own students. If we don't get them, we don't have students, and then we're out of a job. So, we spend 20% of our week. I go out every Friday to high schools. So I know them all very, very well. They have one-on-one lessons with me every semester, 4, 5, sometimes 6 years. So we know each other quite well. Okay, I've got to be effective. I need to know them very, very well. What are their strengths and weaknesses, goals, and how can I best motivate them? Because obviously that moves from kid to kid. This is the population I'm dealing with, right? Low self-esteem. Date me. I have enough ego for the both of us. These are trumpet players. Welcome to my world. Trumpet players can be very challenging. They're generally aggressive and overly confident. As such, subtlety is lost on them. I need to use enhanced motivational techniques on them. Normal ones don't work. Teasing works really well with them too, because I can teach them something with their defenses lowered. So I can sneak in the back door on them and teach them something without them, because you come straight at a trumpet player and they're going to go, nope, arms are folded, you're not getting through. But if you can tease them a little bit, get them to laugh, now they're listening. So there is some, and it's just a lot of fun. So here's one such technique. A frac in a brass player is when you miss a note and you chip it. And on a brass instrument, sorry, I won't get too nerdy, you can play 2 notes of the same, or many notes of the same finger. If you happen to play the wrong one, we call that a frac. This particular student had a real problem with fracking notes, so I made this little graphic and put it up on my door outside my office, and it stayed there. This is now his nickname, Fracula. Here's another enhanced motivational technique. One of these things is not like the other. So I just use this, I'll use it on a student, but they have fair warning. I don't just shoot them out of nowhere. It's a Nerf gun, and I can't get hurt, I promise. So a student was having a hard time playing the high note. He could play the high note in his piece. He'd done it before, but he missed it 3 times in a row. Okay, let me go get the gun. All right, try it again. He played it 5 times in a row perfectly. Which, okay, I got my goal met, but it allowed me to then say, why? What happened this time that you were able to do it when I had the gun pointed at you that you weren't able to do the previous 5 times? So I can always turn it around on them and say, okay, yeah, it's a lot of fun, but there's a pedagogy reason for doing this. Sort of. Here's a student that is a big UK basketball fan. We have the same bet every year. He bets the UK is going to win the championship. He gives me the rest of the field. I'll take that bet any year. He's lost. So here he is wearing my IU gear, holding a picture of Bob Knight. Here he is drinking UK Kool-Aid out of an IU mug. I went to IU. And then there he is wearing an IU hat. He had to wear that all day long. So again, it allows me to lower his defenses a little bit so that I could teach him a little bit easier. There's Star Wars. I'll use that with some others to get into them. Barry Vader. And then there's one of my students saying that I choke him, but I don't go that far. We also bring him in, Darth Vader in for juries at the end of the semester. All the students have to play an exam where they get up and play with a pianist in front of a panel. It's high pressure. It's 40% of their grade, and it's a 10-minute exam. They have one shot. There is no backspace key. There is no delete key in what we do. You got one shot. You better know how to do it. They come in really tense. So I'll put Vader back there. And the first thing they do is they come in and they laugh. Great. Now they're relaxed. Now they can, hopefully, they can play a little bit better. If that doesn't work, then I'll find something else. But just to get them to chill out a little bit so that they can actually play in a way that is going to be representative of their skills. But if you're going to do this, be prepared to take it from students too. Grandpa Swisher having a hard time sitting down. And the one on the right, a caricature a student did of me that says something like, "You could be good, too bad you suck." He claims I said that to him. I don't remember. It's possible. So the students generally enjoy this. So here's some of the comments I've gotten on the lovely yellow sheets. I don't know what the nice shoes was about. They're not particularly nice, but whatever. But again, it helps to have that relationship with them so that when I need to push them a little bit, I can do that without pushing them over the edge. You don't want to visit from the idea office. Be careful. Okay, I'll just leave that there. Find a way that connects. We've done some cool stuff in the trumpet area, some national, international stuff. Find a way to connect, but don't do kumbaya next to me doing that. Thank you.
So Eric concludes our presentations for this afternoon. So if you have any questions for our presenters, they're all here. Please reach out for them. Again, our college's goal with this was just to encourage awareness of the research and teaching in our college as well as a better sense of collaboration. So thank you all for coming and have a great day. Or if you have any questions, please direct them to